here for
You're
me.
gonna do here?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, she'll turn that one off.
But yeah,
Okay,
that one's on. So
okay, testing. Hello? Okay, so we're ready live stream? We're live stream, okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome for those in the room and for those who are joining us via electronically. My name is Teresa Pella, and I'm the current board president for Wachiska. Normally, Mark Broman, our executive director, would be up here, and Mark's mother passed away this morning. Kind of not totally unexpected. She'd been having some issues the last month or two, and her health started going downhill, and she passed away. I think it was 5:45 this morning. So there's a couple of cards out at the entry. If you want to sign a card, we're going to send them to Mark and Anissa. Or if you want to send your own, their mailing address is 2637 Washington Street here in Lincoln. It's 68502. And you can always, if you didn't get that, you can always check with Arliss too. One thing Mark wanted me to mention was that in lieu of flowers, their memorials, options for memorials are either the Callaway Fire Board, the Lutheran Church in Callaway, or Wachiska Audubon. So something to think about. And Dean just gave me information about her service. So visitation is going to be next Friday, March 17th, from 5 to 7, Broken Bow Funeral Home, and the church service will be Saturday, March 18th at 1:30 p.m. at the Callaway, the Lutheran Church in Callaway.
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock? Okay, sorry. Look for an obituary, or if you have any questions, check in with Arliss, and she'll have...
11 o'clock is the service, and then they're having a meal too.
Okay, so 11 o'clock for the service on the 18th. Okay. All right. And another person who has, individual that is near and dear to Wachiska over the years is Paul Johnsgaard. We all know passed away last year. I think it has been about a year ago. Anyway, there is a book, a memorial book that Linda Brown, she has a copy of it over there.
I have one author's copy, so I'm being very, holding on to it. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, so it is and as I understand it, and here's you can order it from Lulu. It's a free book?
It's free if you want to download it from Digital Commons.
Free to download in PDF.
$29 if you want to order it from Lulu Press.
Okay, $29 at Lulu. So again, if that's something you're interested, I'm sure we'll put something in the Babbling Brook for April, or I do have websites up here. You can see me after the meeting. So we wanted to start with those two. So let's do bird sightings. Anybody find anything fun, interesting? Birds or other nature?
My brown creeper came back today, so.
Your brown creeper came back, yes. Yes, yeah. I've noticed all of a sudden a lot of northern cardinals that have been singing. Yes, ma'am.
We had a hawk kill a dove, I believe it was, in our backyard, and my husband didn't know what kind of hawk it was. It was black with white speckles on it.
Boy, a hawk with black and white speckles eating a dove.
Yeah. And then also, I was just in Portland, Oregon a couple weeks ago, and I didn't realize they had hummingbirds there. My sister-in-law had a hummingbird at her feeder in the backyard, and then it wasn't but a few days after we got home that it snowed out there quite a bit. So I was kind of
Puzzled about the hummingbirds in Portland in March. Is that normal? Yes. I don't know, but it's an interesting sight. Yeah, Ross.
I was down at Table Rock to visit our farm, Clacka Farm, and I saw a golden eagle.
Ooh, golden eagle down at Klapka Prairie in Pawnee County. just south of Table Rock. Very cool. Very cool. Hope you put that in eBird. Anything else? Okay. So I have a list of announcements, so hang tight with me. We'll get through them and then we'll introduce the speaker here shortly. So this Sunday, March 12th, is a cedar cutting project at the Prairie west of Arnold Elementary School out on Northwest 48th, starting at 1 p.m. It's supposed to be a nice sunny day. Need an excuse to get outside. Here's a good one. The group will be working on the prairie, chopping the cedar trees around and then putting them somewhere where they can be disposed of. But if you think you might want to come and you have loppers, cutters, tree saws, those would all be welcome. Also gloves, water, don't forget your water. There will be some tools that they'll have available, but if you have any at your own house, it'd be great to bring them along so we know there's plenty. So yes, we'll be cutting down cedar, cutting branches off the cedar and then sawing the trunks down and taking them to a specified location. Most of the cedars are under 8 foot. So this is one of a specific project we can do to help keep the prairie. This prairie is south of 9 Mile Prairie, to help keep 9 Mile Prairie in great shape. The bird trip, the Wachiska field trip, is Sunday, March 26th to Branched Oak Reservoir. Meet at 9 a.m. at Leaders Point, and you can look for more detailed directions in the March Babbling Brook or see Todd Paddock right here in the room if you have any questions. And thank you, Todd. Education Outreach Committee has a lot of activities coming up in April. We're going to start out with a Saturday, April 1st, is Return of the Thunderbirds at the Indian Center. This is the second year that this event will take place, which is a Native peoples-led cultural event to celebrate spring. So there'll be dances, there'll be music, there's food, arts, games and activities. And Wachiska will have a booth there with a couple of activities to have the children activities, and be available to answer questions. And then on Tuesday, April 4th, is Nature Night at Weeping Water Elementary. And I think this is the first time we've been to Weeping Water. So the activity that will be occurring there is the ever-popular Dig in the Soil activity. Have the kids dig through, see what they can find, and look at it under a microscope. They could still use some volunteers, a couple of volunteers for that one. So Tuesday, April 4th, if you're up for it. I think this one is 6, one of them 6 and one 6:30. And is Tim here? Tim Knott? Yes. Tim Knott back there. If you have any further questions, you can check with Tim or Bruce. Is Bruce Melberg here? Okay. So Tim is here, one of the co-chairs of the committee, and you can talk to him a little bit more. And then a second nature night is going to be here in Lincoln at Saratoga Elementary, and that's Tuesday, April 25th. But we're good on volunteers for that night. And then Saturday, April 15th, is from 10 to 2 is Earth Day, the Earth Day, Lincoln City Earth Day celebration at Innovation Campus. So the committee is working on activity ideas for that day, but we'll need volunteers. So again, if you think that date and time could work for you to come help out, let Tim know. Okay. Birdseed orders are due, online birdseed orders are due by midnight tonight. It closes. If you want to do paper version, Arliss has some forms, some order forms in the back of the room. You can see her after the meeting. If you pay tonight, you need to leave money with Arliss. But if you want to do online after the meeting, you can rush home and order online as long as you do it before midnight. A couple of just kind of things that are different things that have happened. For years, Amazon has had an Amazon Smile program where they would donate a small amount for shoppers that selected a particular charity. And Wachiska has kind of been on that list for several years, but Amazon's now deleting that program. They've done away with it. So thank you to those who have over the years supported supported Wachiska through that donation. I don't know if there's going to be anything to replace it, but it's no longer an option. But Wachiska is, for the months of March and April, has been selected by Hy-Vee at the store at 6001 Village, which is over in Williamsburg, as the not-for-profit organization to receive $2 for every red bag that is purchased. I think the bags are $2.50. So March and April, $1 of that purchase will come to Wachiska. And they're kind of cool. The bags have something, they're red, and they have a little saying on them that says, "Does this bag make my heart look big?" You know, kind of an eye-catching thing and conversation starter. Climate signs, vote with climate in mind. We're getting close to the election, April 4th election, primary election, and then the May 2nd is the general election. And we still have some vote with climate in mind yard signs that you can purchase from in the Wachiska office for $10 each. Or Arliss has a few tonight if you'd like to buy one tonight and take it home. And the board meeting, my last note here is the board meeting is set for Tuesday, March 21st at 7 p.m. via Zoom. So anything I missed, Arliss, or anything else you want to add? Tim?
You may have mentioned this already, but we're gonna be doing some tree cutting this week.
Sunday,
Sunday, 9 o'clock.
yes.
It's a good project. If anybody has an extra saw or a neighbor wants to help, or we can help 1 o'clock. Directions.
Okay, thank you, Tim. All right, before I introduce our speaker, let me introduce Wachiska. For those of you who are not familiar with Wachiska, it's a 50-year-old independent chapter of National Audubon with a geographical area stretching through 17 counties in southeast Nebraska. The organization mission is to bring people together to preserve and restore tallgrass prairies and other natural ecosystems, promote birding, support native wildlife, provide nature education, and advocate for the sustainability of our natural community. And I hope you gathered through all of those announcements that I just gave is that these are the types of things that are helping us move towards and fulfill our mission and vision. So, our speaker tonight, Ted LaGrange has been Wetland Program Manager for Nebraska Game and Parks Commission for 29 years, where he was a colleague of Mark Broman's for some time. Ted works on a variety of wetland issues throughout Nebraska, including private land restoration, public lands management, research, policy, and outreach. He's spoken to Wachiska previously about Lincoln area wetlands. Tonight, he'll tell us about the recently completed Wetlands of Nebraska Outreach and Education Project. And welcome, Ted, whenever you're ready. And while you're coming up, we'd also like to thank our own Ethan Fries, who's one of our board members, for helping Ted on this project.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And can you hear me okay? All right. I'll try to speak up. Hopefully the microphone will be picking up too. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I did talk to Wachiska a couple of years ago, I think, on one of the remote Zoom sessions talking about wetlands in general. So today I'm really excited to talk to you about a project that we just are wrapping up. Let's see if this works here. It did when we tested it. What did you go to sleep? There we go. Okay. So basically I'm going to talk to you tonight about a little background about a project that she mentioned that is our Wetlands of Nebraska Outreach and Education Project. And I'm going to kind of take you through the process a little bit. It's been a 3-year journey for a number of us. Ethan Fries, who you know is on your board. Dakota Altman was also involved with Platte Basin Time Lapse. I'll talk about their role and and their amazing work on this project, and share you a little bit of the output from it. Can also talk about what we consider when we're talking about putting educational materials together for people in Nebraska to teach them about wetlands. And then finally, we're going to give you a little taste of the multimedia projects that the Platte Basin Time-Lapse Group, Dakota, Ethan, and others have put together. So if it all works, I've got a video trailer that's a couple minutes, and we'll show that near the end. And then also, when I wrap up, well, I'm happy to answer any kind of questions about wetlands as best I can, for as long as you want to ask questions. We'll take the break. If people want to, and I'll ask you kind of at the end, if anybody wants to come back in, I have some of the films. There's 5 films that we produced, and I'll show those, what the titles at the end. 20 to 30 minutes is what the full film runs. So if anybody isn't ready to go home yet and wants to stay a little bit, come on back in. We'll roll at least one of the films and kind of give you an idea what they look like. It's really a treat visually, what the Platte Basin Time-Lapse crew has put together. And again, you'll get a sample of that when I show you the trailer. But first off, Nebraska has a huge diversity of wetlands, and I probably don't have to tell this audience that, but a lot of people are really surprised. Nebraska is a flyover country, right? Or they drive down Interstate 80 and they don't understand the diversity of wildlife or the diversity of wetlands that we have across the state of Nebraska. It's one of the things that drew me to the state 30 years ago. I did a trip out here. I'd actually worked for Iowa DNR as a research biologist. Came out here for a conference in Aurora, Nebraska. We toured the Platte River. It was in March. And so I got to see the Platte River. We got to see the rainwater basin wetlands, and just thought, wow, what an amazing landscape. And about 3 years later, I applied for and got the wetland job in Nebraska, and have been here now almost 30 years. So the sandhills, our saline wetlands, just amazing diversity of wetlands. And then, I wish you could appreciate all these photos, because they are amazing photos, and I didn't take any of them. So this is just, again, we'll show some better close-ups, but this is just a little collage of a lot of different photos, showing the diversity of fish and wildlife and plants that are in Nebraska's wetlands. And credit goes to the Platte Basin Time-Lapse crew. Ethan, Dakota, and the other producers working on this project took these particular photos. So they do amazing work when it comes to photography and videography. And some of those are also in the publications that were out there, and I'll touch on those in just a moment as well. So, and then maybe as important, we care about the diversity of fish and wildlife and plants, but we also have a diversity of human uses in these wetlands, and that's really important. Is the human aspect. And so there you go. Now you see the pictures better. So I'm going to go back to that one so you can see those pictures a little bit better. So and again, all these, when you look at the crispness, the variety of things, they're pretty cool. So then we have this diversity of human use, and it's everything from ranchers and farmers and acreage owners and people out doing science and people doing wildlife observation and anglers and hunters, and we've got all of these different, and education with kids, and so we've got all of these different user groups that interact with all of our natural resources in Nebraska, but certainly interact with the wetlands that are an important part of our lives. And so, again, for a group like this, wildlife observation, getting out in nature, really important. But for the general citizenry of Nebraska, the things that these wetlands can provide, things like clean water, groundwater recharge, flood control, sequestering carbon. There's a lot of benefits to society broadly that people just don't have a very good handle on. And that's one of the reasons we undertook this project, is to not only sell to folks like you that understand the importance of conservation of wetlands, but also to more broadly the general public, so they understand what we're excited about and what wetlands can do. So I came here 30 years ago. Some of you might have some of these publications. So when I started the job here, I would get phone calls. It was before we had the internet. So a lot of the younger people don't realize there was a time before the internet, before cell phones and all those things. And so I would get a phone call and I would dig through these and dig up some brochures because people would say, I want to know something about wetlands. And so I would mail it to them. And I realized we didn't have a lot of really good stuff about Nebraska wetlands, like that I could hand them. So I started a process back then with some others to say, can we put all of these brochures into one piece of information that's about Nebraska wetlands that you can give to the public, give to a school group, so they better understand wetland conservation. Also about that time, this was 25 years ago probably, so my kids are in their 30s now, so these are my two kids at the time. So they were in elementary school. They went to Beatty Elementary here in Lincoln. And of course, being their dad and being a wildlife biologist, I got asked, hey, can you come and talk? They knew I worked in wetlands. They said, hey, we got a unit on geography in Nebraska, wetlands. Can you come and talk about wetlands? And I said, sure, I'm happy to do that. I never turned down a chance to talk about wetlands. So I went to their school and talked to the kids. And of course, my kids knew a little bit about wetlands. But when I asked the kids in a Nebraska classroom, do we have any neat wetlands in Nebraska? I was met with this blank stares, right? Like they had no clue that we had really interesting wetlands in Nebraska. You know, I asked them, do we have any cool animals in Nebraska wetlands? Again, blank stares, and then of course some kid puts his hand up and says, I'm doing a project on alligators, and you know, and I'm doing a project on the Amazon rainforest or the Everglades, and it's like, and those are cool. I love those places, and nothing against that, but it's like, why don't they understand we've got world-class wetlands and wildlife, you know, here in the state of Nebraska? And so started to think about how can we message better, you know, the neat resources, unique resources that we have here in Nebraska. And so initiated a project working with a number of partners back in 2002 to 2005. And we put together a guide to Nebraska wetlands, a Trail Tales issue that went to all the fourth graders in the state on wetlands. And then we put a video together with working with Nebraska Public Telecommunications at the time. And they aired it on the network, on the PBS network, and so pretty cool, and got a lot of good play. But one of the things we did is back then, you know, we produced a bunch of VHS tapes, right? So at the time, that was the technology. You know, the school said, hey, we need VHS tapes, and then we switched to DVDs, and we provided those, and then we did upload to YouTube on the web. But clearly, this is almost 20 years ago now, or 20 years ago when we were working on it. The materials are outdated. They definitely needed updated. In addition, how people consume and interact with information is very different now than it was 20 years ago. So there was a need to initiate a new project. And I'm getting near the end of my career, and I was trying to like, okay, do I take on a new project? Because it's a lot of work, you know, 3 years and doing a big project, but decided to go ahead and do it, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is where we went with that journey. So at our agency, Nebraska Game and Parks, we have a fairly new Fish and Wildlife Education division. Lindsay Rogers, some of you may know Lindsay. Lindsay was just left the agency. She was our division administrator. But their mission is to talk to school groups and just the general citizenry about educating about fish and wildlife. And so I went first to Lindsay and her group and said, hey, because I'm a wildlife biologist, I'm not an educator, and I said, hey, would you be willing to work with me on updating education materials? So can we get them to the state curricula standards? Can we make sure they get into classrooms for use? Because if I just produce as a wildlife biologist and don't understand some of that, it's not going to get the play that it does if we work with our educators. So work with our educators on that. And then at the same time, I was certainly, and I've known Mike Forsberg for years, and Mike and I started at Game and Parks the same year, back in 1993. And so Mike left Game and Parks. He was a photographer for Nebraska Land Magazine. He went and opened his own business, and then about a decade ago, he circled back to forming this Platte Basin Time Lapse group, and you probably are familiar with Platte Basin Time Lapse. Mike Farrell and Mike Forsberg got that project started, And I really admired the work that they were doing, again, thinking about how do people consume information now, and it's in these little shorter segments, fascinating video, telling stories that captivate not only talk about the wildlife, but also talk about how people are interacting with that wildlife. So I thought, let's talk to them and see would they be interested in working on this project and see if we can make that happen. And so the project came together with our education folks, with the Platte Basin Time-Lapse Group. We got a large grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We worked with a cooperative fish and wildlife research unit at the University of Nebraska, and also Ducks Unlimited provided some funding for the project. So we put this project together and said, okay, let's update these materials. Let's update the guide. Let's put a new kids magazine out. Let's put some multimedia products, including 5 films and Esri story maps. I'll touch on what those are. And then see if we can host those on our Nebraska Game and Parks Commission wetlands part of our website. So people can go there, get information, and then share this with educators. So in a future generation, hopefully you go and ask, do we have any cool wetlands in Nebraska? Somebody's gonna say, yeah, we've got the rainwater basin, and the saline wetlands are neat, and do you know about the sandhills? So that's what we hope with this project, and that we got going. So don't need you to read all these names, except Ethan's on there. Ethan and Dakota, again, are on your board, but we've got some people from, again, our education division. This was kind of the group that led the effort, but it has our education people, our communications people, because again, I'm not a communicator either. I'm a wildlife biologist. We got those people, some of our wildlife people, the cooperative unit, and then the Platte Basin Time-Lapse crew. So they were we met, I think we met yesterday. I think that was our 18th meeting on this project. So these things take a long time, a lot of effort to keep it all pulling together, and I'll show you the product here in a moment. So, and here's the crew. This was 3 years ago. Interestingly, this was just before the pandemic, so this was March. The pandemic was just starting, the COVID, March of 2020. So this project was just getting underway. Little did we know at that time, this was at the mill, a little get-together we had, what was going to be facing us in the next few months, COVID-wise, and all the challenges that would generate with shutting down the university and field work for a bit, but amazingly, that crew, went through and just persevered. They did great. They were really, really energetic, creative, super crew to work with, and really produced an outstanding product. Again, I'll share that with you in a moment. So we also put an advisory committee together because we're the government, right? We've got to have some committees, but also we wanted educators to look at the materials we're generating. So if you look, most of the top half of this group are really educators. So we wanted, if we're going to produce something, we wanted a school teacher, a nature center operator to look at that, look at a draft, which they did, and say, yeah, you're on target, or tweak this would be of interest, this wouldn't be, you can't show this, you can show that. So we got some of that input from that group. And so when we're talking again with doing education, it's really important to understand that it's about these connections, right? It's about finding, and you all have really strong connections to wetlands and to wildlife. There are a lot of people that don't have that connection. So how do we increase that awareness of why wetlands are important to the average person on the street in Nebraska, the average school kid, the average person sitting in the coffee shop who doesn't know anything about wetlands or really that much about wildlife. So we want to figure out how do we share that amazing story, and there are some amazing stories to share. And so we're doing that, or this process, we work with different stakeholders. So we can't tell this story without talking about ranchers, farmers, scientists, hunters, anglers, bird watchers, photographers, and there's also a huge artistic side to this. Again, creative storytelling, doing good graphics, amazing photography, amazing videography, great audio. All that's really important in talking about. And the photos here, are photos, again, the Platte Basin Time-Lapse crew took. This is on a alkali wetland out along the North Platte River. Again, a lot of people have no clue something like that's in Nebraska, but that's out near the town of Bridgeport. big prairie dog town behind it, all these wetlands, and so really, really neat area, like along the North Platte River. And so finally, in this approach, the key is really that how do we convey that these wetlands that we all love are really important to everyone in Nebraska. And the quote at the end I really like. Grace Gard, who's our educator, worked on this project, put that together. It's not her quote, but the key to effective science communication isn't the science, it's the communication. And so, right, we have the science, we have people like myself who understand wetlands, but how do we communicate that in an effective way to diverse audiences across the state? And yeah, neat Avocet picture there. Ethan took that one. So great, amazing work there. So, and yeah, if you have any questions about some of the species and stuff I show, if I don't let you know what it is, just holler, and I'll do my best to help identify it. But, and so we produced, and the neat thing is that February 2nd, who knows what February 2nd is in this group? No. Well, you're right. You're right. It is Groundhog Day, and I appreciate groundhogs. I just saw one the other day on my bike ride. But it's also World Wetlands Day. Did you know that? So yeah, so we kind of had a little fun play on that. So February 2nd in the United States is Groundhog Day, and it is also World Wetlands Day, recognized around the world. And so we set February 2nd to be the release of these materials. And so just a little over a month ago, we released 5 feature films, the Sandhills, Playas, Saline, Riverine, and Urban films, a shorter overview film, 5 Esri story maps associated with those wetland types around the state, Sandhills, Playas, Saline, Riverine, and Urban, an updated guide to Nebraska wetlands that I have out there, the kids booklet for wetlandology, something kids can use in the classroom, and then we're working on a couple of other products that will be available for educators shortly. And I'll show you where and how to access that new information that just was released last month. So again, publications, I have some out there. The guide is all updated again from 20 years ago, so a lot of amazing photography in here by both Nebraska land photographers and also by the crew at Platte Basin Time Lapse. I think I even have a photo in here, which is amazing, but it's not that great a photo. So, but yeah, so this is a great resource. And then the kids' book, the Wetlandology, that we're going to distribute like we do our Trail Tales magazine to all the schools in the state. So that's going to get sent out. There's copies on the table. If you need more, let me know. It's available on our website, and I'll show you that in a moment. And you can look at it on the web. You can also request additional publications. So if you had kids, grandkids, neighbors who you think would like, one of the kids' magazines or whatever, you can order them right on the site. So when we did the films, we spent a lot of time 3 years ago talking about how are we going to tell the story about Nebraska wetlands, and how are we going to break it up. And so spent a lot of time, and we came up with these big categories of wetlands in the state. So the Sandhills, obviously an amazing wetland area, 20,000 square miles, 1 million acres of wetlands present. Most of our wetlands in the state are up in the Sandhills. So we had to talk about the Sandhills, we knew that. We have playa wetlands. Playa is like the rainwater basin that many people know about in south central Nebraska. Internationally important to migratory waterfowl and shorebirds. Lots of other playas around the state. Really ephemeral, really agriculturally dominated, but an important wetland type to cover in Nebraska. We have wetlands associated with all of our rivers and streams, so there's wetlands in every county in Nebraska. And so we have a riverine category, so to talk about things like the Platte River, Niobrara River, Missouri River, all the different rivers in the state that have wetlands associated with. And that is a huge project just in and of itself. And then finally we have some very unique, rare type wetlands like our eastern saline wetlands and those western alkali wetlands, like I mentioned, out along the North Platte River Valley. So we had a film. We ended up with this particular film focusing on the eastern saline wetlands that are located right in and around Lincoln because they're so important to the foundation of Lincoln, and they're really a unique and resource with highly endangered species like the Salt Creek tiger beetle and saltwort, a plant that's on our state endangered list. So those are 4 main types we kind of focused on. And then we came up with the type urban. And urban can include lots of things. It can be riverine, it can be a playa in an urban area, lots of different wetland types. It can also be created wetlands that are used for filtering water or for holding back storm water. So and clearly we have an urbanizing population, and so we thought it would be nice to focus on a category we ended up calling urban. So not just Lincoln and Omaha, but also looking at wetlands in small towns throughout Nebraska. And so those are the 5 films that we ended up doing and that we now have available. So again, the Platte Basin Time-Lapse Group, you recognize a few characters on here. Again, Ethan and Dakota. We have 5 different producers work on the project. Again, Mike Forsberg, Mike Farrell, the founders of the group. Mariah Lundgren coordinated the project and produced the Sandhills. Ethan Fries worked on, everybody kind of worked on a little bit of everything, but Ethan did the Playa film. Grant Reiner did the Riverine film. Dakota Altman did the urban film, took the lead on it. Again, everybody worked on everything. And then Brooke Talbot and Mariah and a number of others worked on the saline film. And then Sydney Parks did the animated graphics that are in the film. So again, just a big shout out to that crew of talented individuals. And there's other people in addition to this, obviously, who helped too, but really great group there that worked on that. And just a few fun, I would take photos of the photographers periodically. So when they weren't interviewing me or whatever, you know, I would pull out my phone and just take some pictures of them out interviewing and exploring and doing all kinds of time-lapse photography, camera traps, drone work, you know, lots of different techniques to explore the diversity of wetlands we have around the state. One of the things that was kind of neat on the project is we kind of messaged as we went along. So hopefully you heard a little bit about the project, because we've been working the last couple years talking about the project, whether it be on webinars or a news release or on social media or talking to different conferences. So over the time, there's been probably hundreds of different posts and presentations about what we were doing at the time. And now the exciting part is we've got final product and we're ready to share and show and to talk about that, which is what I'm here doing today. So where do you find all this? So it's available. The easiest thing to remember is what I circled there. If you go to nebraskawetlands.com, and it's mentioned in the guide, it's mentioned in this, the Wetlandology too, so that the easy name, nebraskawetlands.com, will take you to the wetland section on our website. And so you can go down there, and there's the Playa wetlands, and that's where the Playa film is, the Sandhills, saline, riverine, urban. That's where the products are available. And don't study this too much, because we're in the process of revamping our website, so it'll look a little different, but the name's going to stay the same. So I'm not sure how it's going to look, because that's going to happen April 1st on our agency website. But this information's still going to be there. Go to nebraskawetlands.com. You're going to be able to find it. So one of the things that's pretty neat on this is these story maps. And I don't know if you've ever seen an Esri story map. It's kind of like an interactive publication. And so this is the Playa one that Ethan did. And so behind the scenes look at the wetlands. And so it talks about techniques that like Ethan used. It talks about, it shows a photo gallery. It shows some short clips of different things. And also talks about who the producer is. And talks about kind of their reflections, you know, what they learned on their journey as they immerse themselves into this wetland type. And this is, again, Ethan did the playas, and this is a rainwater basin playa shown here out at North Lake Basin, right by the town of Utica, in the background, and all kinds of waterfowl in front you can see there. So, and then this is just, you know, if you scroll down, we could do this interactively, but I just did a screen capture. You know, this is one. You can play an audio of what it sounds like in the marsh, and you can see some of these waterfowl photos. Again, these are all duck photos that Ethan took. So you got American widgeon, northern pintail, and redhead as an example. But as you scroll through there, you know, just lots of stuff to explore. So if you're bored sometime, go to that site, take a look at it. I think you won't be disappointed. And then the films are available there. So you can just click on the film, the arrow, when you get there, like the urban wetlands in that film will play. And again, they're 20 to 30 minutes. We have five different feature films. So go check that out on that NebraskaWetlands.com site. And with that, I'm going to show the trailer here, if it works. So it's about 2 minutes and almost 3 minutes long. And it's got some audio. How's the audio work here on the stuff playing on the computer? Does it play pretty good?
I think it'll be okay.
Okay.
Get started, let's see.
You might have to do it on the computer to hit the arrow. I think let me try to advance, we'll see. Oh, there we go. The thing that I find fascinating about wetlands is the diversity and abundance of life that they support. So there's these amazing, green, vibrant places.
They are mountainous sand dunes with wetlands peppered in between. The sandhills are magic.
This is my first time being out, like right out on the land. So I really appreciate this time. I look at these lands and I feel that connection, that ancestral connection to the saline wetlands.
I think one of the benefits of our school is that we're able to share this wetland and this pond area with young people and their families. For someone who's never seen an urban wetland, that's going to be an incredible new experience for them.
Wetlands are super important. I mean, number one, water sustains life, but they become these little pockets of survival.
The more you spend time, the more you'll see. The more you see, the more you'll want to come back and visit them again and again.
I just love so much about them. They're so surprising and incredible. It's just like a wealth of everything that we need. It's like a reflection, so I'm very grateful for them.
It's important that people understand they're not a wasteland. There's a great opportunity for us to talk about the benefits that go beyond wetlands that really influence every Nebraska resident.
Pretty cool stuff, huh? Yeah, I mean, it just takes you on a journey, and that's just a short little bit, you know. Again, afterwards, if someone wants to stay, we'll queue up one of the films and can show that in its entirety, 20 to 30 minutes, if anybody wants to stay and take a look at that. So really pleased with the work that they've done. And so again, with that, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions about the project or about wetlands in general, or yeah.
Hold on, let me grab a microphone.
Okay.
Teresa, our wirelesses aren't working.
You want me to talk into here? Oh, you mean for the audience?
For the
Yeah,
audience,
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
I think Ted will.
I'll repeat question.
They have to be wired. People need to come to the microphone. The wire is gonna end.
eventually.
I can repeat the question too.
Yeah, that would be faster.
Yeah, I can do that. So, you had a question, sir, and then you did. So.
I just wondered, have we lost wetlands recently, or are they increasing, or?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, have we lost wetlands recently, or are they increasing? So like, what's the status of Nebraska wetlands? And that is covered in like the wetland guide, but basically, statewide, the estimate is we've lost about 35% of our wetlands, about a third. So we historically had almost 3 million acres of wetlands. We still have about 2 million acres, but a lot of that's in the sand hills because, to be honest, they haven't figured out how to grow corn and soybeans in the sand hills. So there's a lot of wetlands still there because, and the ranchers are great stewards of that, of that sand hills landscape. So there are places like the saline wetlands, the rainwater basin, parts of the Platte River, parts of the Missouri River where we've lost 80 to 90% of our wetlands. So that's the historic loss. The better news, I guess, is that that loss has slowed down in recent years. We have federal and state laws that do protect wetlands now, and we also have a variety of partners working on conservation. And those conservation initiatives, including Wachiska Audubon and Audubon Great Plains and Ducks Unlimited, there's a lot of great groups working on wetland conservation. And so the most recent estimates show we've kind of stabilized the losses. So because of restoration work, because of the laws, we're not losing as much as we used to. Now, if some laws change, if we lose funding for some of the conservation programs, we could certainly go back and start losing wetlands at a higher rate again. And yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, who took all those pictures? Were there, people in the project took the pictures?
So like Dakota and Altman, they did the videography and they did the photography. So yeah.
Ethan should
And-
stand up.
Yeah, Ethan, did you know Ethan? Everybody knows Ethan's on the board here. Ethan is one of the producers that worked on this. And it's good to see you, Rosemary, because you worked on the advisory committee for the project back in 2005. So, yes, yep, I sure do. So, yeah. So yeah, we just updated what you helped with back in 2002 to 5. So, yeah. Yes.
So we see wetlands, it seems like come and go, they go clear down and they come back up, but there's a certain point where you lose them all together then? They don't come back?
Yeah, so the question is, wetlands, they dry up and wet up, and one of the things we talk about, the story maps cover it, the films cover it, the guide covers it. One of the things I really want to emphasize is the dynamics of wetlands. So out here on the Great Plains, we have floods and droughts, and so naturally wetlands go dry. Some of those playa stay dry for multiple years. Get a big rain event, they fill with water, and like within a week, there's frogs calling, there's shorebirds and ducks on it. It's really amazing how resilient the wetlands and the wetland life are out here on the plains.
I also think about how they eat each other as it gets drier.
Yeah, there's some of that happens too. So the floods, I don't worry about floods and droughts that are kind of natural. I mean, people panic about a huge flood or a drought, and that's partly natural. What we are concerned about are those longer term losses when you have drainage, development, invasive species, sediment washing into a wetland that doesn't work its way out. Those are not natural, and those cause that long-term loss. But that's where the good news is with the conservation efforts. We're working on restoring wetlands, and there's some great stuff in the films about restoration activities that we're doing too. So, yeah.
I've heard a lot about the proposed, or maybe actually have been changing the marginal wetlands as a part of the federal law system.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I followed that very well, so
Okay.
could you explain what's going on, where the things are going?
Well, yeah, how long do we have? So the question is some federal laws and changes. And I talk to the UNL class about every year about this, and I give an hour-long lecture, which I probably have on my computer. I can pull it up. So, and I start with, it's complicated, and I end with, it's really complicated. But the simple news is, so federally, wetlands are protected under the Clean Water Act. They're recognized as waters of the United States. And then and that's since the early or mid-1970s, that wetlands have received some degree of protection. But that's changed over the years due to court cases. There was a huge court case in 2001 called SWANC, Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County, and that ruled like isolated wetlands, like our playas, are no longer covered by the Federal Clean Water Act. But things with connectivity to navigable waters are. And then there's been 20 years worth of wrangling in the courts and with administrations on what's connected, what's adjacency. And there was another Supreme Court case where Justice Kennedy ruled, kind of tried to split the difference. It was it was like a 4-4 to 1 decision. And he wrote an opinion about what adjacency is. And then in recent years, administratively, the Obama administration put a Waters of the United States rule together to try to clarify administratively what those courts had talked about. And then that got challenged in court right away, overturned in some places. Then you had the Trump administration come in and they rescinded the Waters of the United States rule and put in a navigable waters rule. And then that got challenged in court. And then the Biden administration came in and rescinded the navigable waters rule, and just in January came out with a Waters of the United States rule that EPA is and the Corps are following. So bottom line is with all that, most wetlands, except truly isolated wetlands like playas, if there's any kind of a floodplain connection and stuff, they're regulated generally under federal law. There is a Supreme Court case that's been heard this year, the Sackett case. They will rule on that, probably in June when the Supreme Court issues their rulings. That has the potential to really, depends how they rule on it, but if they rule that adjacency means it's a flowing water with barges on it, navigable water, it could definitely remove protection from wetlands, but we don't know how the court will rule on that case, so still waiting on that. That was less than an hour, by the way, too. So.
There's a question.
Yeah, yeah, going back to your
Could you
name.
briefly discuss how you restore a wetland? That sounds more than just plugging up the drains.
Yeah, so how do we restore a wetland? That's also complicated. I have an hour-long presentation on wetland restoration, so
Ted.
I'll stay here all night. So,
I'm gonna put you behind the mic, because the live stream's. not
oh, the
getting
live
you.
stream, yes, yep, I forgot about that. I know you could hear me, so thank you. So yeah, how do we restore wetlands? And it varies depending on the wetland type. One of the things we do is we use an interdisciplinary team of experts. So it's not just me, like as a wildlife biologist, I play a role in that, but we heavily rely on soil scientists, and we have a soil scientist here that, or you did soils, didn't you, Ross, with NRCS?
Yeah,
So, yeah, you're retired now, but yeah, you worked on some projects.
A lot of wetland determination.
Yes, yeah, so, and so soils are a huge part of it, like when we have sediment in there, where was a wetland historically, but we also use engineers, hydrologists sometimes, certainly engineers are needed, you have to survey the site. I always think about it as like, look at the landscape, look at the wetland and the surrounding watershed and say, what was altered to create it to be drained or partially drained, and then what can we do to fix those? What can we fix, and how do we go about fixing it? So it could be taking sediment out that's washed into the wetland. It could be plugging a tile line that's draining the wetland. It could be plugging that drainage ditch. It could be opening up water that's diverted in the watershed into that wetland. So a variety of different things that we look at on wetland restoration. And someone else had a...
Did I hear you correctly that you also included created wetlands in the urban wetlands category?
Yeah, we did. Created wetlands are, they're still a wetland, and some places they've done some really nice things. There are created wetlands in more agricultural landscapes, like a lot of our farm ponds. Our Salt Valley reservoirs, those would be considered created wetlands, or lakes, but they have a wetland fringe associated with them. But examples of things like stormwater detention cells, bioswales that are channel remeanders and things that are happening in urban environments that are kind of creations in an altered environment, but are trying to mimic the wetlands that maybe historically were there and got developed, paved over.
Right.
So.
Was there any controversy about including that category?
No,
So to speak?
no, because it's just part of the scene. I mean, we focus mostly on natural wetlands, but and we want to conserve and restore those natural wetlands. That's what a lot of our focus is on. But when we talk about benefits to society, those created wetlands, if they're done right, sometimes that's the only option to slow water, to filter water. And so, yeah,
Do they get covered by the court cases regulating wetlands too?
that's one of the complicating factors is what do you do with artificial wetlands. Right now, most artificial wetlands are covered under the Clean Water Act because they're considered waters. They're of the United States. There's some exemptions, sewage treatment ponds. Now certain true irrigation ditches and things that were never in a wetland are exempt now. So there are some created features, but most farm ponds and reservoirs and things are covered under federal law. So. Yes?
One of the things though, it's kind of a myth in the sense though where they say different wetlands are protected. That's nice to hear that. But to enforce that protection is a whole other thing. I had an experience myself where I reported an area of a wetland that was turned into a recreational trailer park along a river in a county,
Okay.
Southern County. Went through the process of filing the complaint, doing all the documentation that needed to be done and everything. But then in the meantime though, again, working with the Army Corps of Engineers and everything, and I'm not blaming them, I understand, they're understaffed. But again, they are so overwhelmed, it was like it had to be on the list. In the meantime, here this is, it's now got concrete in the area, they got the little campers, they got everything set up in there. But the other thing though, I throw it back to it, is an educational thing because in the community there, they knew it, but yet they didn't understand the wetland. But then they look at, oh, this is gonna be, we can bring campers in and people are gonna be shopping in our grocery store. But the whole thing of it is, that guy, the developers, the two that did it, the fat cats, they just didn't care. They put it in because they know that this was kind of a smaller area, they aren't gonna do much about it. And so that's what I always hear about protection, and there's more to that for protection to have to enforced. And
well,
that's what's scary. It's going on all over, little pockets of this, but that soon adds up. You know?
Yeah, I mean, so the question's just about enforcement. Even if an area is protected, doesn't mean necessarily, sometimes it doesn't get turned in. People don't even know about it. There are midnight conversions that can happen out there. And also, the federal agencies who enforce that are short-staffed, and so they can only tackle so many violations. And so they do periodically, and so like many of our laws, it's like the honest people follow them, and that's helpful. But if people want to flaunt the law, sometimes that does happen, and that's just unfortunately a consequence.
That is one of those that people kind of go, that case, sarah.
Yeah, well,
scary. It's an educational thing.
Yeah.
We see all the values of water.
Yeah.
What they do.
Well, that's one of the reasons we took this project on, right, is because as people who are advocates for wildlife, like we all are, it's real easy for us to say wetlands are really important. They're hugely important for biodiversity, but people don't make the connection between wetlands and water quality, and that's something that needs to, I think, just be recognized more widely. A favorite story of mine is with one of the cases where I think it was under probably the Obama administration, the Waters of the United States rule that created a lot of concern in rural America over federal regulations. And it was the McCook newspaper had an editorial saying that like this is, and I can't quote it exactly, but it was like this is like federal overreach and we shouldn't worry about these wetlands, and then but then they went on and said what we should be worried about are water quality, groundwater recharge, and flood control. And it's like, I wish I could have had a conversation with that editorial writer, because it's like, wait a minute, if you want water quality, flood control, recharge, wetlands play a role in that. But people aren't making that connection. So we try to do that with things, but it's an uphill battle. So, yeah.
What is the impact of fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides on these wetlands?
Yeah. So yeah, question, what's the impact of fertilizers, pesticides, and other chemicals that are being applied on wetlands? It's certainly something we're concerned about. We've done studies to look at different chemicals, different pesticides. The problem is there's so many different kinds of chemicals being used. There's so many different types of wetlands, it's really difficult to fully get a grasp of that. And like lots of times, we're behind the curve, right, on understanding impacts and of new chemicals, for instance, and what generationally, you know, what we might learn 10 years from now was a problem that we don't recognize. So it's something that, again, there's experts who look at this, look at animal health and you know, amphibians and invertebrates, insects and things in these wetlands. There certainly are some effects, but amazingly, again, the resiliency of this, some of these very much farmed right through, you know, agricultural chemicals are put on, and it's amazing that, you know, there's frogs and toads and aquatic invertebrates and snails and stuff out in some of those. It just amazes me how resilient some of that life can be, so.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
And I may not know what I'm talking about.
That's all right.
I don't know very much about any of this. But around the Ashland area, there is talk that they're going to put in this lake. They're going to dig the hole, fill it with water, and then they're going to have a 5-mile whatever around it. If that goes through, how does that affect the water in that area?
That's a great question. So yeah, there was some money in the last legislature approved, you know, that Star Wars funding they called it, water projects were part of that. The lake over somewhere in that Ashland area, yeah, they don't, I've not seen where they've identified exactly where that is, but the money was to do studies to look at a variety of things, and certainly environmental impact is something they're going to have to take a look at. So, and I assume like our agency will get involved with that at the time when they have a proposal to look at river flows, endangered threatened species. The Corps and EPA are going to look at wetland issues. So there's a lot to happen before that becomes a reality. But certainly there's some things that we'd have to take a look at. So.
So I just want to ask for Lancaster County and the immediate surrounding counties, do we have, you mentioned, I think there was significant lost wetlands that would be riverine.
Yes.
Along the Platte. What about, do we have any other wetlands apart from the saline, you know, really local, really, any, or were here when Europeans first arrived, that are anything like the Pliers? I don't know of them, so I'm just curious. Do we have local wetlands?
No, great question. So the question was about what other kinds of wetlands do we have, like in Lancaster County, besides the floodplain wetlands and the saline wetlands. And saline wetlands are kind of a subset. They're down on the floodplain, but they get their salts from salty groundwater. So we have lots of artificially created wetlands, like farm ponds, especially like in Lancaster County. But probably we historically had that we've really lost a lot of, and that's these seepages that come out of the hills. So in this area we have Kansas glaciation, so there's till covered by loess, and so those tills, you get water seeping out of the hills in places, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but and so you get this water comes down, passes through that loess into the till, and then it seeps out the sides. And so there were these slope wetlands that were probably just like wet prairie. That, you know, you would have had cordgrass and three square and different things in those. Those we have very few of. There's a few like on Spring Creek Prairie and the like. Some of the prairies that Wachiska have those intact, but in most places those have been farmed through, and because you know it's in farmland, and then also drained out, or where we have grass waterways and ditches and things. Those historically would have been more of a wet prairie, wetland seep coming out of the hills. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Lana has one more question.
Okay.
I've never heard you play it, but, you know, I don't know anything about this.
Yep.
You showed the picture, it was beautiful, blues, greens, and
Yeah, yeah.
how are they different?
So yeah, we've got playas. Ethan's an expert on playas now. So playas are a type of wetland that they're kind of circular, semicircular. They're very ephemeral. They go wet and dry really frequently, and they receive their water from overland flow, so rain and snow melt that comes in fairly small watersheds. A lot of them less than a mile watershed. So that rainwater flows in. They're a low depression. Some people call them buffalo wallows historically. There have been studies on them that show they're wind formed, that there's a loess layer, a fine wind-blown soil. That loess in places blew out, deflated, and where that happened over thousands of years, you got a low spot, water flowed in there, and then clays formed a clay layer under that, and then that clay layer is less permeable, and so water ponds on top of it. So you get this little shallow water ponding area, but they're highly productive because they're sitting out there in this prairie landscape. They wet and dry, and so they're tremendously important to like waterfowl and shorebirds because they're productive and produce a lot of foods that those species like. So, but they're also out in this fairly flat, highly valued agricultural land. So there's been a lot of agricultural impacts to those playas. So. One other,
Ross,
yes.
I just want to let everyone know that out of the 9 pieces of property that Wachiska owns, 3 of them have really nice wetlands. Bird downtown, which is an alkali wetland. With
Oh, neat. Yeah.
Fertig up by Skyler is about 40 acres, and it's real close to the Platte River, and it's got some really nice wetland.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about going out and looking at those. Still need to do that. So, yeah, that's a great one. There's some. Ethan actually took me out there first. Ethan and Dakota, and there's some footage in the Riverine film. I think has a little bit of footage from the Knott Prairie, and that's an amazing, high quality, wet prairie that you just don't find much of in this part of the state anymore. So, great points on those wetland types. So. The last thing I wanted to say before you go to break is, again, I mentioned at the beginning, it's after 8 now. If people want, obviously you go whenever you want, but if after the break, if you want to come in, well, the reason I put a question mark up there is you got 5 films to choose from. If anybody wants to stay, we can vote or something on which one you want to learn about, and I'm happy to stay and roll one of the films in its entirety, and it gives you a really neat.
Show of hands, how many would be interested in staying? We have a few. Yeah. Okay.
So maybe after
so let's do like it's a 8:15 now, so you come back at,
Yeah, but let's vote now so we can get it set up.
oh, which one?
I
Oh,
want to see Ethan's playa one.
okay. Ethan's playa one. That would be a really good one, and we have the expert here. And it also covers a lot of like migration, and we're into that spring migration right now. We were talking before the program. You've probably heard a lot about the saline wetlands, but they're all really neat. So why don't we, are people good showing the playa one?
Yeah, that'd be great.
We'll do the playas, and then at a future meeting, if you want to show one of these others, we can make that happen. Or you can go onto the website and just view them on your own. So
what do you need, about 5 minutes, Linda, to get it ready to go?
People can get their coffee and come back in.
Okay to bring the tea in? Their tea, no cookies though. Tea's okay in the room, cookies not, so eat your cookie quick. Cookies are okay? Okay.
just clean up. So, all right, well, thanks if you have to go, but if you want to stay, happy to stay. So.
We'll be back. So I guess those on the live stream can stay if they want to watch it, Linda?
Yeah.
So they can just stay where they're
I
at.
think if we're going to roll it on the system,
On the system,
here,
they should be able to see.
should be able to
Yeah.
see it. I
Okay.
don't know whether everything will work on that, but
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
worth a shot.
yeah.
He didn't even know that anybody was supposed to. So when he got a letter from the Corps of Engineers managers, and he was like, oh, I don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah. So you may save spelling, so.
Yeah, that's really.
And then people were noticing, but you know, it's all for the sake, oh, that camper.
Well, and you know, the beauty is, it's right by the park that has camping and has that available to them, you know, so it wasn't like, well, this was unique, you know, they really needed this. So, I don't get that either, it
Well,
was.
it's just like, and then people, you know.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's that comes off of Highway 10, no, Highway 92 comes off. Well, they developed their own access off the highway. There's restrictions on that. Again, central Nebraska. It's like, you know, no one cares, you know, and that, and Pace across the road.
Right. No, I just, I never been to.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I only knew Eastern Nebraska, and I was just like.
Get out to the sand.
I was like, wow.
If you ever get a chance, if you ever get a chance in the springtime after all the rain, if you get into a small plane and fly over the sand. But what's happening though now, there's so much corn. I mean, I'm fortunate.
Even there, huh?
Oh, it's center pit.
Oh, wow.
I remember though in the 70s, I had opportunity to fly all over the sand in Sherman County, put out the tail out there and back and everything. We could talk with waves of grass. But then I flew, this is 20 years ago. I had just to be in the center pit of stuff.
Well, I really believe, I never went to be everywhere you looked, all you could see was, just like you said, rolling green hills, occasional roads, occasional utility poles, that was it. Everywhere you looked. And when you drove through a lot of places, it was still the same. I don't know how I even lived there. We drove by the same ranch, and then we wouldn't see one for 5 or 10 miles. How can you live here? Where do you get it from?
Good to see you, Rosemary. Oh, good. Yeah, glad I saw your name tag there, because I had you on my list to email to, and I don't think I had a valid email for you, and so. Mhm. Yeah. Yep, yep. Yeah. Yeah, yep. Land, soil, and water, hydrology. Yep, yep. So, nice. And what schools were you at? West? Okay. Yeah. We ready to roll? Here, let me say something and then we'll. And Ethan, do you want to say anything about the film? This is your film, so.
Yes, Ethan.
They didn't put me on the spot. Yeah, I don't know. Well,
Help us.
Right up there in front so the live stream people can hear you.
You didn't know you were gonna get this.
Yeah.
I did, yeah.
I mean, like Ted said earlier, all these videos were like a huge collaborative effort. So yeah, everybody on the team kind of pitched in with all these. It was definitely a team effort. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to work on. Didn't know a whole lot about playas before I started this, but kind of fell in love with the landscape. I feel like they're kind of underappreciated, and we've lost so many, and they're in a very agricultural landscape that might not seem very exciting when you just drive past. But hopefully the video can kind of showcase some of the cool stuff that's happening in playas and encourage people to go check them out for themselves. So.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. And I guess whenever you're ready, if you can click the arrow, let's see if it'll work here. So wetland is defined by 3 characteristics. It has to be water present at least sometime during the year. So the plants adapted to growing in water have to be present. And then the third factor is soil. So the soils take on certain characteristics when they're in a wetland that are different from a non-wetland soil. A playa is a type of wetland that is characterized by a couple of factors. Playas receive their water from overland flow, from rain and snow events, where they're perched above that surface of the groundwater due to a heavy clay layer in the soil. And that clay, when it gets wet, it ponds and holds that water above the surface. They also are not connected to the streams and rivers, and so they tend to be isolated wetlands. Playas are highly modified because they sit on productive soils, fairly flat lands, and areas that are very important to irrigated agriculture. So we're in Saunders County in Nebraska at a Todd Valley playa wetland, and that's one of 4 playa complexes that we've identified in Nebraska. So it's the Todd Valley, the Rainwater Basin, the Central Table playas, and then we have an area we call the Southwest playas. Playas are important for a couple of factors. One is soils are highly productive for plant and animal life. They're extremely important for migrating waterfowl and shorebirds that use these areas as rest stops on their migratory journey. When these wetlands dry out, that clay soil that gets really large, deep cracks. And so when you get a rain event, that rainwater moves directly into the groundwater. And so they're very important points of groundwater recharge for our aquifers, including the Ogallala Aquifer. One of the things I think is really unique about playas is they're out here in this highly agriculturally dominated landscape. And you come upon one and it's like this little hotspot of biological activity. It's just amazing when you're driving around, come upon a playa, and it's just full of life.
Yeah, come on. I'm not trying to hurt cats. I'm going for a boat ride.
Last month we were up in South Dakota visiting a project where they're capturing blue-winged teal. Blue-winged teal is a type of duck. It nests in Nebraska some, but also especially up in the prairie potholes of the Dakotas and up into Canada. So they were putting a satellite transmitter on the females, and then they use those satellite transmitters and will follow them on their migratory journey, seeing where the birds go, what habitats they use, what they do in those habitats.
The prairie pothole region, it covers a really vast area across North and South Dakota, a little bit into Minnesota and Iowa, and then going up into Canada as well. This area just holds a bunch of seasonal wetlands. I've had quite a few of my transmitter birds travel through Nebraska. Like all the birds that we're marking up here, a lot of them are passing back down into Louisiana and even further south depending on the species.
Louisiana has more coastal wetlands than any other state in the country except Alaska. And the types of wetlands that we have here with salt marsh, intermediate marsh, brackish marsh, fresh marsh, all the river deltas. You get up in a plane and you look down at this place and we're surrounded, the marsh goes literally 100 miles off to the east. sea level rise predictions hold true, I mean, we're going to be standing underwater in 50 years. This place won't be here anymore. That's very concerning. There's millions of ducks and geese that winter in this area, and there's no place else like it. We had everything baited, we had the net set and everything last night. We met here at 5:15, drove out within 2/3 of a mile of the site, parked the truck, walked in the dark, got in the blind. Obviously the ducks were there, and then it was just a waiting game. Fired the net when all their heads were down, and we didn't have any issues with that. And then it's just a mad rush to get them all out of the water and crate it up and up into the trucks as quick as we can. So we brought them back here, about a half mile back to the lab. So we banded everything. We picked a few pintail hens to put transmitters on, fitted them with their transmitters, held them for a few minutes, and then we released them right back here on site. Keep tabs on their journeys forward. Birds depend on us. We've manipulated this landscape so much. We owe it to both the wildlife and the next generation to do the best we can to preserve what's left. When they pick up and leave the Gulf Coast, full tank of gas will get them up 3 or 4 states away. So those places to stop and refuel are critical for them. So that's their gas station, that's their grocery store on the way, and they need dependable wetlands along their stop. It's as simple as that. Basically, the whole region of eastern Nebraska is pretty important continentally for literally everything I've put transmitters on down here, from pintails to white fronts, mallards, blue wings. Eastern Nebraska is a big stopover area for a lot of our birds.
The rainwater basin is just such an interesting landscape with such a high density of wetlands. There's so many opportunities for conservation. It's right in the middle of the flyway. And the flyway includes the areas in the south where they winter, such as the Gulf Coast, and also their breeding grounds in the north, like the prairie potholes. A large proportion of snow geese stop over in the rainwater basin during spring migration. I'm sure most people have seen the giant flocks in the sky, and that is a huge proportion of the continental population of snow geese that stops over. We also get a lot of mallards and northern pintail that stop over. It's been estimated that 50% or more of the northern pintail population may stop over in the rainwater basin during spring. We get a lot of blue-winged teal and green-winged teal, and several species of diving ducks as well. There's not too many other areas in this country that you can see something like spring migration in the rainwater basin.
Franklin's gulls. So there's also some Hudsonian godwits in the mix, and one marbled godwit.
I'm Joel Jorgensen. I'm the non-game bird program manager with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So I cover in my program all the birds that are not hunted in the state. The fact that these are dynamic wetlands is important to shorebirds. Just the fact that you have water levels that are up and down all the time. So that dynamic ends up creating the shoreline habitat and the mudflat habitat that shorebirds need. There's a few different species that are probably the extreme migrants: white rump sandpiper, Baird sandpiper, buff-breasted sandpiper, and Hudsonian godwit are species that come to mind that spend their winter in extreme southern portions of South America, Argentina, or Chile, and then also breed in northern Canada, Alaska, and in some cases, like with the buff-breasted sandpiper, even in Siberia. Essentially, the entire world population of buff-breasted sandpipers are stopping over in the eastern part of the rainwater basin from between Hastings and Lincoln. The fact that this landscape in some regards is so unremarkable when you first look at it, it's not like a mountain range or some other exceptional landscape, but in my view, it is still exceptional just from its role for so many different migratory bird populations. And just that you have such huge congregation of birds, that doesn't occur everywhere. That's kind of a unique thing that we have here in Nebraska and in the Great Plains.
Go take a peek. You guys ready? Alright. What do you want to look at first?
Oh, victory.
Here they come back. Get ready, coming back. Ready, Logan, from the right.
Several of us hunt a lot of different things. Teal season's kind of a nice way to kick it all off and get out while it's still kind of warm outside. Conservation isn't cheap. Our system's set up so that the user pays and everybody benefits. So areas like this here are provided by those hunter dollars and those recreational shooter dollars. They're easy to access and open to everybody, which really adds to it. As the name implies, rainwater basin, what rain you have or don't have kind of shapes that landscape.
One of Aaron's favorite spots to go this year was Bone Dry. And there had been years where we were there, you could actually float a canoe. There were people there with small motorboats even. I mean, you were, waist deep in the water. And this year it's completely dry. So it's always very interesting to see how different it is from year to year.
I would say the main recreational opportunities playas provide are through wildlife observation and hunting. We pump areas as we can to meet the needs of both wildlife and our waterfowl hunters. Early on in the season, we do a little bit of pumping for like the teal hunting season and the early duck season. Just if the wetlands already got a little bit of water in it, it can fill up fairly quickly with our pumping. If it's totally dry, has those big cracks in it, we can pump all day in August or even September, and that water just soaks right back down into the ground. If we were to constantly pump water into this wetland, eventually all the plants would die out or change over to a different type of plant. When that water does disappear, they dry up. That allows many of the plants that are important to germinate, and many of those species won't germinate underwater. Even though people don't necessarily always like to see it when these dry up, that's part of a natural process, and it's an important process to kind of reset the cycle of these wetlands and allow them to sustain their productivity.
This whole area was nothing but open prairie
Very, very few trees on the landscape. It was all native grasses and wildflowers. And then you had these pockets of wetlands out here in the rainwater basin. We have really good technology today to inventory wetlands. We have the use of satellite data, aerial photography from airplanes and such. And what we have discovered is that only about 10 to 11% of the rainwater basins that were historically on this landscape are remaining today.
In this cropland setting, the playas have been modified over time to try to, in some places, drain or remove water so they can increase their amount of crop production. They would dig pits, so they would dig these areas out that are not huge necessarily, but they're fairly deep. And so that concentrates the waters. You still have as much water out there as far as like amount of water, but it's all concentrated in a really deep pit. And that's much less productive for wildlife. And if you get too much water too fast over bare cropland, you can actually get sediment moving through erosion. So that material ends up washing with each rain event into the playa. And so once it gets into the wetland, it's kind of stuck there. It's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not necessarily one thing that's caused that playa to be altered. All those things cumulatively can really have a negative impact and have really altered most of our playas in Nebraska.
We want to restore the wetland back to its natural condition to where it held water and produced the native plants that grew here before it was converted. Wetland ecologists, such as myself, we will come out and we'll look at a wetland and we'll see if it's functioning the way that particular type of wetland should function. If we come to a rainwater basin wetland that has a big pit in it, has a drainage ditch coming out of it, these are all hydrologic modifications that need to be fixed.
You have to understand what the alterations were and then how to fix them. So it requires input from a soil scientist. Sometimes you'll need help from a botanist or a hydrologist.
And then the engineers will come in and survey the area and draw up engineering plans to accomplish the restoration that we want on the area. And whoever we end up hiring then will come in and will accomplish that restoration as it was designed on the plans. Once you get the hydrology of that wetland restored, get the water cycle back to what it was historically, the rest kind of takes care of itself. We've brought a lot of wetlands back to life, and that's going to continue on for the future. For the rainwater basins, I think there is a lot of hope.
Most of the wetlands in Nebraska, including our playas, are in private ownership. They're owned by farmers, ranchers, acreage owners. When we do conservation work on playas, we have to work collaboratively with those landowners in order to get that conservation accomplished.
So I'm Andy Bishop. I'm the Rainwater Basin Joint Venture Coordinator. The Rainwater Basin Joint Venture is a public-private partnership. So a lot of what I get to do is work with the different conservation organizations, probably most importantly landowners, to try to develop projects that fit into this working landscape that we call the Rainwater Basin.
My name's Gail Marsh. We're standing in the middle of Hamilton County, and I'm a corn, bean, wheat cover crop farmer. This is a wetland area that was farmed quite a few years. It was pretty prone to flooding out.
Gail always says that, he could always get the crop planted, and then the storms in June came, and he always lost his crops at least 3 to 4 times out of 5 years.
I was getting ready to plant for the year, and out of the cold blue, Andy called me up, just cold call. Didn't have any idea who he was, and he said some things I liked, and so we had a meeting, and we restored this back to a wetland.
So we learned a lot from our early restoration practices, but we really quickly realized that these were dynamic systems that evolved under grazing by buffalo, wildfires, drought, deluge, and the disturbance is really important for maintaining the desired wetland vegetation communities that provide the seeds that the ducks rely on.
And grazing is about the only option we have to raise revenue. Sure, we got a lot of help through Andy Bishop, Game and Parks, the Nebraska Environmental Trust. Anytime I ask for help, they're there to help. We've owned this property since 2002, and we did have a pair of whooping cranes here a year ago that were just here for one day. This year, on April 14th, saw the 4 large whooping cranes over across the road. I was all concerned the birds would leave right away, and they ended up sticking around for 11 days. And a lot of people got to see the birds. I mean, my wife and I, we got very attached to them. And I have a 10-page journal, which about a page a day for where they were located, what they did, where they went to feed, who was here to see them, and it was a fun time.
For a lot of time, wetlands have been thought of as wasteland or an obstacle to farm around. And now that we understand better the ecosystem benefits and services that wetlands can provide, it's important that people understand they're not a wasteland. They're a natural filter. They're an important recharge point. They provide habitat. They provide recreational opportunities. There's a lot of different things that wetlands provide that make the landscape more enjoyable. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to talk about not just the habitat and the wildlife, but also the benefits that go beyond wetlands that really influence every Nebraska resident.
Southeast Nebraska, around the Wymore Beatrice area. And too, as a kid, I remember these draws, and even back